The courtroom was tense before Karoline Leavitt even entered, not because of the case, not because of the judge, but because of who she was and what she was wearing. Pinned to her lapel, small, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, was an American flag. The only thing louder than its presence was the silence that surrounded it. She was there not as a defendant, but as a witness, called to speak on election transparency and federal communication policies. The room was packed, legal observers, media, and a federal judge known for his obsession with decorum. Judge Alton Greaves, a man who'd once fined a veteran for saluting during closing statements. Karoline took her seat. Whispers followed. The judge frowned. "Miss Leavitt," he said coldly, "this is a courtroom, not a rally. I must ask you to remove that pin." Eyes darted across the gallery. She looked at him. No anger, just clarity. "This pin," she asked, touching it gently. "It's not a statement, it's a promise." A pause. Then, "Nevertheless," Greaves said, "if you wish to remain in the witness box, remove it." You could hear a pin drop. Karoline didn't move. Instead, she leaned forward into the mic. "Your Honor, if I may, I'll gladly remove the pin if you can name one other piece of fabric 13 men died to raise." The room held its breath. The judge blinked, and the entire dynamic shifted. The judge didn't speak for a long moment. His mouth was half open, as if waiting for the right legal words to come, but none did. Because Karoline Leavitt hadn't made a legal argument, she had made a moral one. "I'll gladly remove the pin if you can name one other piece of fabric 13 men died to raise." That line was already echoing through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled like wildfire. One typed it straight into a live tweet. Another whispered to a cameraman outside, where feeds were being refreshed by the second. Judge Greaves straightened in his seat. "This courtroom," he began slowly, "is not a place for symbolism." Karoline nodded politely. "That's where we disagree, Your Honor. Because every courtroom in America sits under a flag. The law doesn't float alone. It stands under something. This pin, it's not a decoration, it's a debt." She paused, then added, "I don't wear it for theatrics. I wear it for Corporal James McGovern, my grandfather, Vietnam. He came home in one piece, but never left the war behind. When he saw me wear this pin, he used to say, 'Good, remind 'em what bought this silence.'" Now even the jury box sat frozen. The flag hanging behind the judge, so often unnoticed, now seemed to glow just a little brighter. The judge tried to pivot. "Regardless, there are courtroom rules." "Yes," Karoline interrupted, voice steady, "and none of them say I must hide my loyalty to the very nation whose laws you interpret." Outside, the quote went viral within 30 minutes. "Remind them what bought this silence. It's not a decoration, it's a debt." Karoline Leavitt just gave the most patriotic courtroom speech in a generation. Inside, the judge had a choice: force the issue and risk the court becoming the villain, or pivot and try to salvage authority. He cleared his throat. "We'll proceed." Judge Greaves had relented, but the courtroom tension had only shifted, not vanished. Sitting at the other table was Assistant Federal Counsel Miriam Beck, a rising star in legal circles and known for her aggressive cross-examinations. She saw an opportunity, not just to challenge Karoline's testimony, but to undermine her presence entirely. She rose, her tone clipped and sharp. "Miss Leavitt, with respect, this isn't about your grandfather or your fashion choices. This is a legal inquiry. If you're here for political theatre..." Karoline raised her hand calmly. "Let me stop you right there, Counselor. You can question my memory, my experience, even my politics if it makes you feel clever. But don't you dare question my flag." Gasps from the gallery. Reporters looked up from their keyboards. Karoline leaned forward slightly, her voice cool but commanding. "I didn't come here to wear red, white, and blue. I came here because too many people are being told those colours only belong to the past or to one party. That ends today." Counsel Beck tried to pivot. "So are you suggesting your patriotism makes your testimony more credible?" Karoline didn't blink. "No. I'm suggesting that if you're uncomfortable with a witness wearing the flag, maybe you're not uncomfortable with bias. Maybe you're uncomfortable with belief." A beat of silence, then murmurs across the room. Even Judge Greaves didn't intervene, perhaps because he understood what was happening. Karoline wasn't just defending herself. She was reframing the courtroom. The clip of her words hit Twitter 20 minutes later. "Don't you dare question my flag. Uncomfortable with belief, not bias. Karoline Leavitt stuns courtroom with verbal takedown. A CNN analyst said live on air, this hearing just became a cultural referendum. Karoline Leavitt adjusted the microphone in front of her. The topic of this hearing is communication protocols during federal elections, she began, voice calm, but we're pretending this isn't also about control, about narrative, about who gets to speak and who gets silenced. You could hear the pens scratching. She continued, in 2020, I personally flagged internal emails where federal agencies coordinated with social platforms to limit visibility on politically sensitive topics, topics that turned out to be true. They didn't fact-check the story, they preemptively buried it. Judge Greaves leaned forward. Ms. Leavitt, I will remind you this is not a political commentary. Please confine yourself to the facts. She didn't flinch. She stared directly at him. I am confining myself to the facts, but if the facts make someone uncomfortable, that's not my bias, that's their guilt. Gasps from the gallery. A few nods. The judge cleared his throat. Let's keep this within proper decorum. Karoline held her ground. Your Honour, with respect, you don't interrupt the truth, you listen to it. The judge froze. He didn't gavel. He didn't speak. He just stared and let the moment pass. Because even he knew, that line was now everywhere. Within 10 minutes, it was trending. Listen to the truth. Karoline in court, you don't interrupt the truth. TV anchors read the quote aloud. Talk radio hosts broke protocol just to play the clip. Even political rivals admitted it. You can disagree with her, but that line was undeniable. And Karoline wasn't done. I'm not here for a partisan brawl, she added. I'm here because when government decides which speech gets seen, elections don't need to be stolen. They're simply steered. Karoline Leavitt reached into her folder and carefully pulled out a printed document, one the public hadn't seen before. The judge noticed. So did the government's lead counsel. What are you about to present, Miss Leavitt? Judge Greaves asked. Karoline held up the page like a receipt. This is an internal memo dated October 18th, 2020, written by a senior advisor at a federal agency. The subject line reads, Flagging emerging narratives. Coordinate with trust and safety teams immediately. She glanced up. It names 4 topics and includes recommendations for content suppression on social media platforms. None of them were false. All of them turned out to be true. Before she could continue, the government's attorney stood abruptly. Objection, Your Honour. That document is not in the public record and may contain sensitive materials. Karoline didn't flinch. That's exactly the problem. She turned toward the gallery, and by extension, the American people. We live in a country where a woman wearing a flag pin can be asked to remove it in court, but a government office can quietly filter what you're allowed to read, watch, or share, without ever being questioned. The judge tried to interject again. Miss Leavitt? She raised her voice, steady and clear. You don't need permission to tell the people the truth. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The judge sat back, silent, because at that moment he understood. Any further interruption wouldn't look like order. It would look like fear. Karoline continued, If this hearing is about trust, transparency and accountability, then don't silence the person who brought the receipts. Question the ones who wrote them. The courtroom murmured. Journalists rushed to text producers. One anchor blurted on live TV, This hearing's over. Karoline Leavitt just took the wheel. By the time Karoline Leavitt finished reading the memo, the courtroom was no longer a place of order. It was a moment in history. People weren't just listening, they were remembering. Remembering stories they'd been told were debunked before facts could surface. Remembering the feeling that truth had somehow become dangerous. Remembering what it was like to wonder if silence was safer than asking questions. Then it happened. A man in the gallery, a Vietnam veteran, stood up slowly and began to clap. Another followed. Then the whole room. Not wild applause, not disruptive. Just quiet, firm recognition that something real had finally been said. Judge Greaves didn't gavel, he couldn't, because to do so now would have made the court look smaller than the witness chair. Outside, news trucks surrounded the courthouse. The story had already dominated every major feed. Leavitt drops bombshell memo in federal court. She dared them to stop her, and they didn't. The pin, the paper, the truth. A White House spokesperson was quickly dispatched for damage control. In a hastily called press conference, she claimed, "Miss Leavitt's document has not been properly vetted, and her comments today were clearly politically motivated." That backfired instantly. Karoline, watching from a side room, turned to reporters and gave a short statement. "I'm not motivated by politics. I'm motivated by something older and more dangerous to the powerful: honesty." And then she gave the line that would define the entire hearing. "Silence isn't neutral. It's permission. And I don't grant it anymore." Within the hour, that phrase trended worldwide. "Silence is permission. I refuse silence. Leave it truth." Banners were printed. College campuses replayed her speech. Even critics were left speechless. Karoline Leavitt had silenced the silence, but the ripple was just beginning. That evening, while news networks re-aired her testimony, a whistleblower from inside a federal agency leaked an internal email to the press. The subject line: "Leavitt hearing strategy: contain and neutralize optics." The content was damning. It outlined how officials planned to discredit any emotional appeals and request the judge enforce courtroom decorum to limit visibility of symbols, e.g., pins, flags. The language was cold, strategic, calculated. By morning, the email was published in full, and when court resumed, it wasn't just the public that had changed, the judge had. Judge Greaves sat stone-faced. The courtroom was packed. Reporters were standing in corners, shoulder to shoulder. Veterans, students, and civil liberty lawyers filled the gallery. Karoline took her seat. The judge adjusted his robe, tapped the gavel softly, and said, "Before we continue, I have a statement to make." The room went still. "This court has reviewed emerging evidence, including internal communications that call into question the objectivity of how this hearing was initiated and managed." He looked up, not at the room, at Karoline. "Miss Leavitt, I owe you an apology." The gallery inhaled. He continued, "It is now clear that the request to remove your American flag pin and other constraints placed upon your testimony were not rooted purely in court decorum, but rather in narrative control. This courtroom should never be used to suppress sincerity, especially when that sincerity is backed by fact." Karoline didn't nod. She didn't smile. She just listened, like the rest of America. And then, just before calling the next witness, Judge Greaves said what no one expected from a man so stern. "In 30 years, I've rarely reversed course in real time. But truth isn't bound by precedent. It's bound by courage." That line hit the feeds in seconds. Truth over precedent. Judge backs down. Karoline wins the room. Just as the courtroom began to steady, the door in the back opened again. A woman stepped in, early 40s, business attire, her security badge still visible around her neck. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on Karoline. She walked straight to the bailiff and whispered something. Judge Greaves leaned forward. "State your name and intent." "Alison Reeve. I'm a federal communications contractor. I have signed NDAs, but I have also signed an oath to the Constitution. I have information that directly supports Miss Leavitt's testimony." The room froze. The prosecution looked panicked. "Your Honor," they blurted, "this witness was not on the list." And neither, Judge Greaves replied dryly, was the truth, apparently. The judge allowed her to speak. She took the stand, cleared her throat, and delivered the blow. "During the months prior to the 2020 election, I received directives from a supervisor that stated certain topics, even if factually accurate, were to be reported as misinformation vectors, simply because they disrupted preferred messaging." She held up a printed directive. "I was instructed to flag anything related to Hunter Biden's laptop, election machine security vulnerabilities, and early vaccine policy debate. All of it, before it was fact-checked." Karoline sat quietly, absorbing it, not triumphantly but gravely, because this wasn't vindication. It was confirmation of everything the American people had felt, but had been told was conspiracy. Judge Greaves closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his tone was different. Not firm, not angry, worried. "Ms. Reeve, do you understand the risks of testifying here today?" "Yes, Your Honor. And you're willing to accept them?" "I've accepted worse, staying silent." From the gallery, a voice called out, "You're not alone anymore." The room stirred, because for the first time the walls of silence didn't just crack, they collapsed. The final day of the hearing began with a storm, not outside, but inside the courtroom. Federal counsel Miriam Beck returned to the floor visibly rattled. The presence of whistleblower Alison Reeve, coupled with viral media pressure, had shattered the prosecution's momentum. She stood to deliver her closing remarks, her voice sharp, clipped. What we've witnessed over the last 48 hours is a well-orchestrated performance. Ms. Leavitt has turned this court into a stage for patriotism as theatre, emotion over law, and unchecked disruption. Karoline didn't blink. She waited, then calmly stood, asking to respond. Judge Greaves hesitated. "Go ahead," he said. Karoline stepped to the front. No notes, no folder, just the pin still shining on her lapel. "They keep calling it disruptive," she said, "because I brought facts they didn't vet, truths they couldn't control, and witnesses they didn't expect." She scanned the room slowly. "If that's disruptive, so be it. Because what's more disruptive than truth is a government afraid of it." The silence that followed was total. The kind of silence that makes people stop mid-text, mid-thought, mid-spin, and listen. Even the cameras seemed to zoom closer without moving. She added softly, "If standing up, speaking up, and refusing to apologize for my love of country is a threat to order, then maybe we've confused order with obedience." Gasps, nods, a hand over someone's mouth in the gallery. Judge Greaves adjusted his papers, then simply said, "Ms. Leavitt, you may be excused." But no one moved, because in that moment, even being excused felt irrelevant. Outside, media anchors dropped their scripts. On air, one commentator admitted, "This isn't just a hearing anymore. This is a chapter in civic history." 3 days after Karoline Leavitt left the courtroom, the ruling was released. Judge Alton Greaves, once known for silencing gestures of patriotism, issued a statement that shocked the legal community. This court was not only moved by the testimony provided, it was re-centered by it. The duty of the judiciary is not just to interpret law, but to recognize when law is being used to obscure truth. He declared all pending actions against the communications Karoline exposed to be suspended pending a federal review. And in a rare moment of humility, he added, "I questioned a pin. She reminded me it was a promise." Across the country, the ripple turned tidal. College campuses replayed her quotes in classrooms. Veterans posted side-by-side photos, their service pins next to hers. And on Capitol Hill, a bipartisan group of lawmakers introduced the Leavitt Doctrine, a legislative proposal to increase transparency between federal agencies and the public during election cycles. But the final image that stuck wasn't legal. It was human. A courtroom artist, present every day, finished her sketchbook quietly. On the final page, she drew Karoline standing alone near the witness chair. No flash, no drama. Just her hand gently resting over the flag pin. The sketch was picked up by the National Portrait Gallery under a new exhibit, Voices That Refused Silence. And below the drawing, engraved in steel, "If standing up for the flag is disruptive, then maybe we've confused order with obedience. Karoline Leavitt." Karoline never claimed victory. She issued no victory speech. She simply posted one photo to her social media, a close-up of the pin, no caption. Because the nation already knew what it meant.